Hello and welcome to another British Cartographic Society Teatime Talk. And welcome to another of our Map Memoirs. So I'd like to welcome both our speakers today. We have John Peaty and Nick Millea. So I think I'd like to start us off initially with John.
Just say good evening, ladies and gentlemen. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dr. John Peaty. I'm the convener of the Historical Military Mapping Group of the BCS. For those of you who do know me, bad luck. And I'm talking about two favourite historical military maps tonight. So without further ado, Chris, I think we'll start with the first one. Right, thank you, Chris. So my first map is what is known as the Waterloo map. So I assume that everyone has heard about the Battle of Waterloo and the Duke of Wellington, 18th of June, 1815. And this is the actual map used by Wellington and his staff to plan and fight the battle. It was carried on the battlefield by his Quartermaster General Delancey. It was created for Wellington by the Royal Engineers. It is made up of 10 smaller maps pasted together to create a single image, hence its very irregular shape. The Duke called for a detailed map of the area around Waterloo on the 16th of June, 1815, 2 days before the battle. Various maps covering the region were hastily united and delivered to Wellington. The pieces of the map were created by the Royal Engineers between 1814 and 1815. So they started the year before the Waterloo campaign and battle. However, much of the map was drawn rather hurriedly after Napoleon's escape from the island of Elba in February 1815. It was a field sketch plan rather than a fully surveyed map. The latter procedure was time consuming. It was made under the direction of Lieutenant Colonel Carmichael Smith, who was commanding officer of the Royal Engineers in the Netherlands, which at that time ruled Belgium. The map's dimensions are 135 centimetres by 99 centimetres, and it covers an area of 120 square miles at a scale of 4 inches to the mile. So it is roughly 1 to 250,000 scale, what the military call an operational scale. The map was coloured with iron gall and black ink, graphite pencil, grey and green wash, and red pigment. Lieutenant Walters delivered the map to Wellington after nearly losing it at the Battle of Quatre Bras on the 16th. This young staff officer went galloping off to Brussels, and you get the sense of him bursting in breathless to the Royal Engineers depot, where he meets a brigade major Oldfield of the Corps. They hastily paste together all the various sheets covering southern Belgium, and Walters goes galloping back to Wellington, who's rather otherwise engaged at Quatre Bras. Unfortunately, on his way back, he runs into a bit of trouble with some French cavalry, loses his horse and knocks himself out. As he stirs and wakes up, he realizes his horse has disappeared. But luckily, and it clearly was his lucky day, he soon finds it chomping on some vegetables in a field half a mile away, with all the plans and maps still on it. He grabs the reins, jumps back in the saddle, and heads back to Wellington. There is careful illustration of ground elevation indicated by cross-hatching. And you can see that the northeast corner is more finished than that particular part of the composite map was more finished than the rest of the map. And it was used by Wellington and his staff to plan where he should place his troop. And the Duke indicated on the map in pencil some Allied dispositions. And the pencil marks include the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean, south of the town of Waterloo. And it was actually on the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean and the valley to its south where the Battle of Waterloo was actually fought. And those pencil marks were either for the benefit of Delancey or for the benefit of the Prussians who had promised to come to Wellington's aid. Now, Delancey was mortally wounded by a cannonball during the final stages of the battle, and the map was recovered by Oldfield and returned to Carmichael Smith. There is a story popularised by Sir Walter Scott that the top part of the map was stained with Delancey's blood. However, in 2015, for the bicentenary of the battle, the Royal Engineers Museum had the map fully restored and conserved, placed in a glass case in a controlled environment. And part of the analysis revealed that the staining was not blood, but was just part of the aging process. The map remained with Carmichael Smith until his death in 1860, and then it disappeared. But it resurfaced 50 years later in 1910, where it was donated to the Royal Engineers Museum at Chatham, where ever since it has been a prized possession. And I do encourage anyone interested in the Royal Engineers or mapping or British military history that the Royal Engineers Museum is well worth a visit. There was a copy made for the Prince of Orange and another copy made in 1846, which resides in the British Library. So I now turn from a map of a battle that everyone's heard of to a map of a battle that very few have heard of. So we've now come forward to the Second World War, to the Western Desert of Egypt, where the 8th Army is fighting the German and Italian forces of Field Marshal Rommel, who has invaded Egypt. And everyone, I think, has heard of the Battle of Alamein in October, November 1942, where under Montgomery, the Commonwealth forces decisively defeated Rommel's forces. And very little known is the Battle of Alam Halfa, fought at the end of August and the beginning of September 1942 on the same ground as Alamein. And that was the actual battle that stopped Rommel's thrust into Egypt and forced him on the defensive. The battle lasted a week and he suffered heavy losses and withdrew his forces. And that, as I say, has been overshadowed by the later Battle of Alamein 6 weeks later. Now, the Alamein position is important because with its ridges, such as Alam Halfa, its impassable areas and its areas of soft going, the geology and topography of the Alamein position gave it great natural strength, which is precisely why it was chosen as the place to stop Rommel's drive into Egypt. And after the war, in 1947, it was revealed by Montgomery's chief of staff, de Guingamp, that a significant factor in Rommel's defeat was the planting on him of a false map. Going maps were special sheets with coloured overprints produced as an aid to the movement of armoured units by the Commonwealth in the Western Desert. The going information was overprinted in colour on the map, Blue was generally impassable. Green was recce essential before movement, continuous low gear. Yellow was fair, and red was firm and fast. And to refine the colour coding, overprinted text was used, such as treacherous soft going on green, very good hard sand on red, open featureless country covered with scrub on yellow. And as de Guingamp revealed in 1947, he had a false going map made of the Alam Halfa Ridge and the surrounding area. And it was planted on the Germans by the staged blowing up of an armoured car in a southern minefield, which was then evacuated, and left behind were various things, including a tea-stained map in a satchel, which made its way to Rommel. And you will find the fake map as well as the genuine map in the National Archives at Kew. And this is the fake map. In the centre, the red linear feature is the Alam Halfa Ridge. In the south east corner, there is a large blue area, generally impassable. That is not on the real map. In the left-hand side, halfway up, is another smaller blue area, generally impassable. Again, not on the real map. And then due south of the highest point on Alam Halfa Ridge, there is a large yellow area, which is a depression, the Deir El Agram, which is coloured yellow. And again, that is not on the real map. What de Guingamp has done is he has deterred Rommel from advancing through the south by that large blue area. He's deterred him from advancing through the centre by that small blue area. And he's encouraged him to turn north to the Alam Halfa Ridge by that large yellow area. In fact, on the real map, it is green. It is very, very treacherous, soft sand. And that's where Rommel's 15th Panzer Division got bogged down and was shelled by the Royal Artillery and bombed by the Royal Air Force. And Rommel withdrew with a very bloody nose. And that was the end of the Battle of Alam Halfa. And that was the end of Rommel's last offensive in the Western Desert. So very briefly, ladies and gentlemen, those are two favourite maps, historic maps. One that is well known, relating to a battle that is very well known, and one that is little known, relating to a little battle, but an important battle. So for very different reasons, they are two of my favourite maps in the field of military history. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for that. And we'll, as usual, take questions at the very end. So passing over to Nick now.
Thank you very much, Chris. Good evening, everybody. It's a delight to be here. And what I'm going to do tonight is pick a map which, is it really a personal favourite? It probably isn't a personal favourite, but it's a map which I have had to work with on a regular basis for a number of years. I've been map curator at the Bodleian for, 32 years now. And this map has been pretty much a constant companion for most of those years. And it's a map which I'm hoping most of you will not have seen before. Now, bear in mind, a lot of the work that I do is standing in front of groups and trying to get them to engage with maps, seeing how they respond to maps. And this is going to be quite tricky in front of a virtual audience, so I can't see how you're going to respond to it. But it's always very interesting as someone standing the other side of the map to watch how map consumers, so to speak, deal with what they're seeing and respond to it. And so that's the plan for tonight. So if you bear with me, I am going to share my screen now and we'll see what we can do for you. The map I'm going to show dates from 1644. So we're going a bit older than John, but we're sticking with a vaguely military theme. So let's see how to begin. Not a very spectacular start. This is an action shot from the map room office in the Bodleian. And the item we're going to be focusing on, and I don't know whether you can see my mouse, but if you can, great, is this volume here. Rather scruffy looking volume. We have this niftily pointed or positioned pencil to give you an idea of how big the thing is. And it is effectively a 17th century scrapbook. Okay. On the binding, it says, and this is the bit where you're going to have to believe me, you may be able to read it. It says maps and miscellaneous papers. And down below is its shelf mark, Wood 276B. So that's how we refer to it in the library. It is a collection of, as it says, maps and miscellaneous papers. So why is this of interest? This is the map I want to focus on. Kind of looks a bit like a balloon flying off into the heavens. It's not. This map is a one-off. It's the only copy known to be in existence, so feast your eyes on it now. To give you a rough description of what we're looking at, the upper bit, the upper left part, here is the city of Oxford. And the string attached to the balloon is the River Thames flowing south through, that's Abington or Abingdon, Wallingford, and then down to Reading. So that's what we're talking about. In itself, not a particular thing of great beauty, but there's a lot more to the story of this map than meets the eye. And I will hope to elaborate over the next few minutes and maybe get you thinking and pondering. So let's take a look at what's on the map. This is the kind of level of detail. It's fairly crude engraving. So I've just taken a couple of strips showing the area within the city. You can see here Oxford Castle and an alphanumeric system of identifying various buildings around Oxford. Make note of those letters as we go along. They're not that important, but the letters are really important to the story of the map. And you see there's some numbers as well. So I think it runs from A to Z and 1 to 4. So it does highlight principal buildings in the city. You can see city defences here. Bear in mind, this is 1644. So we're talking the height. Well, we're talking the Civil War. And in 1644, Oxford is a royalist stronghold, but it's been besieged by the parliamentarians. Again, important stuff. So we can see some gun carriages down here, people on horseback. It's fairly crude, but it's a town plan, lots of detail, lots of interest. The title we see on the left. So Oxford, as it now lieth, fortified by His Majesty's forces, 1644. Okay. And on the right is this panel of places identified by letters and numbers. So you can see they're in no particular order, but you've got a variety of Oxford colleges, you have churches, you have the castle, you have the East Gate, Corn Market, so various key locations within the city of Oxford. I'm still not convincing you why this is an important or an exciting map. I'm trying to build this up slowly and get the excitement mounting. Believe you me, there's a twist to this tale, which I'm hoping you're going to enjoy. So there is Oxford in all its glory. Cast your eyes on it, have a good look at it. You can see the Civil War defences right around the edge of the city. You can see a bit of the city wall here. And there is the key, the city centre, and then a lot of the areas beyond that. Rural areas, farm areas, garden areas. So it gives you a good flavour as to the layout of the city at that particular time. And our map that we're featuring, start getting my tongue twisted there. Our map that we're featuring, we don't know who made it. This map, on the other hand, we do know who made it. This was another map of Oxford made in 1644 by Sir Bernard de Gaume, who was based with the Royalists. And here you can see it's a similar idea. You can see the Civil War defences dotted around the edge. There's the Oxford Castle. What you can also see here to the east on Headington Hill is the position of the parliamentarians. So there's none of the finery or the detail that we see in our map. It's just not there. You've got a few churches marked and the street pattern of the city centre, but that's it. Another map showing Oxford in 1644 is this one, which was produced in the recent Historic Towns Atlas of Oxford. So Julian Mumby did all the research on it. Giles Darks produced the cartography, and it is a rather attractive looking map of the layout of the fortifications, the defences at the time. And down at the bottom right, we see here in the legend, defences shown by de Gaume is this sort of pinky colour, which we see down here and along here. The dotted lines are outlines and very roughly shown by de Gaume. So this map is very much based on de Gaume, and then some of the fortifications up in the northeast here are fortifications which de Gaume didn't show, but archaeological evidence has subsequently revealed were there. So you can see there's quite a lot within the city of Oxford. So lots to keep us going, and we can compare this with our 1644 map. So there it is again, just to remind you. You're getting this flavour of the city encircled by defences. Fairly crude engraving. There it is. So what's going on? Here's the map as a whole. So I mentioned earlier, it is folio 30 of this scrapbook. There you see the river flowing south. There's the list of place names. But, and this is where the fun and games starts, what you won't be able to see on your screens is this little line of text at the bottom right. This line of text has been written by a chap called Anthony Wood. And you remember the shelf mark was Wood 276B. He collected all of the maps and plans and images in this volume. So a chap called Anthony Wood, and we'll come back to Anthony Wood in a moment. But what I want to show you next is what he actually wrote at the bottom. This map is made very false. So at this point, if I have an audience in the office, in the library around me, I pause and I offer them the chance to say or to speculate as to why this map is made very false. What does he mean? What's going on? The obvious answer is, look at the size of Oxford. It's enormous. And there you have the river going away. It's tiny. The scales are all mixed up. And indeed they are. But that's not why this map is made very false. And to make this work, it helps if you have a knowledge of Oxford. You know the city. There's your first clue. And I want to draw your attention to this extract of text, which is from the Bodleian's, what was known as the Summary Catalogue, and it describes the map. To which, here we go, the bounding line, there's the size of it. But the interesting thing is here. And in the upper part is a plan of Oxford entirely reversed, so that not only is north at the foot and east at the right hand, but Magdalen appears on the left hand as one of the approaches of the town from the east, and so on. So there's something odd going on here. A wall of fortifications encircles the whole with forts, cannon and troops, but it may be doubted whether the details can be depended on, as the wall differs considerably from the Iconographia of 1648 by Richard Rawlinson, and Wood has noted on the present plan, this map is made very false. So there's something funny going on. At the bottom it says no other copy seems to be known. Okay. So what do we know about Anthony Wood? He's crucial to the story. At the top there, you see a portrait of him. He was an Oxford chap, born and died. He was an antiquary. There's loads of information about him in the Dictionary of National Biography, and I've lifted quite a bit of it here. But what I do like are these little insights into Wood. His notoriously peevish temper prevented him from being elected a Fellow of Merton. There's a bit of a clue to what he was like. But then his research in the 1660s brought on 3 separate publications on the history of Oxford, the annals of the university, and the antiquities of the colleges. He was sponsored to publish, which was great. What else do we know? He liked to call himself the historiographer of the University of Oxford. But his friendships were often destroyed by his spiteful nature. So what's going on here? He had problems. He was tried found guilty of libel. But in the end, he willed all his books to the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford, and they eventually came across to the Bodleian in the mid-19th century. His writings are deemed to have little pretense to literary merit. Ouch! His style is that of a note-taker, dry, brusque, and factual. He was to Restoration Oxford what Pepys was to Restoration London. So he's important. But I've got a couple of lovely quotations I want to throw at you. In the 1660s, a friend of Wood said, "My pen cannot enough describe how Wood's tender affections and insatiable desire of knowledge were ravished and melted down by the reading of that book. What by music and rare books that he found in the public library, his life at this time and after was a perfect Elysium." So things are looking good there. But we move on to 1673, and another colleague said, "He never spoke well of any man." So not great. And going on to 1694, another person with whom he'd collaborated for many years said, "I thought you so dear a friend that I might have entrusted my life in your hands. And now your unkindness doth almost break my heart." So Wood's not coming out of this very well. But I want to carry on this theme, go back to the map. This is a different map. It's John Speed's map of Oxfordshire. There's date of 1605 here, and you will notice, top right, there's a city plan, town plan of Oxford. Okay? Now, let's move on. There it is in more detail. It's a little bit fuzzy, the image. I apologise for that. But there are some familiar things on it. You'll see there are letters dotted around the city. You can see the city wall. There are no Civil War defences. This predates the Civil War. What's interesting about this map of the city is that south is at the top. So you can see Oxford Castle to the right. This is Magdalen Bridge and Magdalen College, so the east side of the city on the left. St Giles heading north out of the city towards Woodstock and Banbury, and up the top here is St Aldate's and Folly Bridge heading out towards Abingdon. So do bear that in mind. There's the speed map from around about 1605, and I'm going to slot it next to our map, what I'm calling the Wood map from 1644. And straight away, there are distinct similarities. Same buildings, pretty much the same layout, the urban layout, but you will notice the orientation is different. So Speed, south at the top, Wood, south at the top. There's St Giles there, there's St Giles there going to the north. But hello, what's going on here? The castle is in the west. Magdalen Bridge is in the east. So something has happened and the north and south of the map have been flipped over. However, the lettering remains consistent. Let's move on. On the left here, this is the lettering from Speed's map, A to Z, 1 to 4. And on the right here, A to Z, 1 to 4 from the 1644 Wood map. Look carefully and you will notice that each letter from Speed, so here's H, Exeter College, we go over here, H, Exeter College, refers to the same buildings. So this is how we can kind of try and make sense of it. And I want to thank my colleague Debbie for getting her phone out there and getting a mirror setting on. It kind of works, but it does strange things when you look at it. It still messes with my cartographic mind to work out what's going on here. A very deliberate switching of all the cartographic information, this north-south flipping. Very, very odd. So there's Speed, there's Wood again, and we have a line effectively drawn right across here, across the middle of the map. What I find intriguing, though, is that even though there's been this north-south flipping, the letters and the numbers identifying the buildings remain the correct way up. So they're the way we would expect to look at them. They're pointing the right way. So the obvious conclusion, I think, to make here is that this map has been designed deliberately to mislead. The parliamentarians were, well, which map do you use? If you use this map, the parliamentarians were up the hill to the left, up on Headington Hill. If you use this map, well, where were they? They were probably to the right and up Headington Hill. So what's the intention for this map to be placed almost like the example of John there, where he was talking about the exploding car and the map in the satchel? Is this an earlier example of the same sort of technique? It didn't really work as such, but there it is. It was used and it was an attempt. So I think that's where I want to roughly leave it at the moment. It's a really great example of something which kind of works, but does it really? And I still, I've been looking at this thing for years. I'm still looking at it, and it just messes around with your mind. It kind of doesn't really seem right, but then it looks right, but it isn't. So I'd be curious to know what people make of it. There it is in all its glory, completely alone. It looks fine. It looks like a perfectly proper and ordinary map, but it's not. And Wood was right. This map is made very false. So thank you for your time, and I hope you've got plenty of questions, and I shall stop sharing.
Oh, thank you, Nick. That's very interesting, and I have to say that's a very nice, interesting coincidence with John's example, which is after very interested seeing that, and you weren't even coordinating this.
No.
That's the funniest part.
Great minds think alike, I think.
None of it was planned.
Okay, so now that we've had both our talks for today, we'll now go on to the Q&A session. So if anyone has any questions, they can drop it into the chat. We'll start working our way through them all. I can see Jim's already said got to love a fake map, so that's been Again, it was genuinely interesting to see that how you've both come from how you've both selected maps that were not what they seemed, and
Well, I think that's always
very
a winner,
interesting.
isn't it? It's always because there's always this. You always feel if it's on the map, it's got to be right. The map's telling the truth, but of course it isn't. And all maps are an edited version of reality anyway, aren't they? So, but this is just a deliberate attempt to mislead, but making it look vaguely polished and professional.
I think that was the thing. Seeing the fact it was fully, the fact it went through the level of engraving as well. It was there was far too much effort in that map for it to be anything other than a serious map. It was you'd expect a fake map at that point to at least be a bit cruder, but
Yeah.
someone's put a lot of effort and a lot of money into making a map, which is a bit unusual for that amount of time. So it's obviously a someone must have been a serious effort or to make it look as authentic as possible. Okay, so we're starting to get questions now. So here's a good one, John. It's how did they make a copy of the Waterloo map?
A copy.
Yes, you mentioned there were several copies of the.
Well, there was, yes, one was presented to the Prince of Orange, and there's one in the British Library. The actual map itself is at Chatham, and it is a composite. It is literally pasted together, hence its very, very odd shape, because they just didn't have time. And so that is the original. What was produced for the Prince of Orange, who later became the King of the Netherlands, and the British Library is just a copy, a lithographed copy of the original. And a lot of what we know about the Waterloo map is actually written down the left-hand side in very tiny writing. So it's a curious combination, the Waterloo map. It's based on a survey that they started the year before Waterloo. It's based on Wellington riding the country and recognizing the importance of the ridge of Mont Saint Jean south of Waterloo in 1814. And it's also a combination of a last minute copy and paste, if you like, stitched together when Napoleon escaped from Elba. So it's this curious combination of foresight and last minute rush. And there's a long history of military history is replete with maps and plans being captured. And in the story of the Waterloo map, when Waters was dehorsed, it was an excellent opportunity for the French to have captured plans and maps and documents, but they didn't. But they have, throughout history, plans and maps and documents have been captured. And it's a case that throughout history, for example, the American Revolutionary War or War of Independence or the unpleasantness, whatever you wish to call it, many of Washington's messengers were intercepted by British patrols, and maps and documents were captured, and they were nearly all fake. And I suspect that map of Oxford was designed to be captured or to fall into parliamentarian hands. And it is quite a sophisticated con. The fake map at Alam Halfa was professionally produced, numbered, stamped, everything. It was produced to the highest professional standard. And then it was folded up, covered with tea stains, and put in a satchel. And it worked.
I think that's an interesting case. It's the fact that we can see it happening. Again, it's the fact that all the key examples in two different examples from two different time frames, and it's yes. So just moving quickly down the list onto the next one. So it's just a comment for Nick. It's the that we've got. It's the I grew up in Oxford and didn't see the errors in the first map until you pointed them out. Just shows to assume what we know so much about the maps that are made. So it is a. No, I have to say thank you for bringing that to our attention. It's just that figure out what was wrong. They have the time and another one is that here we have one. Is that this would be for John. Do you know how much of Belgium was mapped by the sappers in preparation for meeting Napoleon, or was Wellington sure of managing Napoleon to fight on the ground of Wellington's choosing?
Right. Well, thanks, Chris. I think I mentioned in the talk that the 10 sheets stuck together covered an area of 120 square miles. And that's because there was no obvious invasion route. If the French invaded Belgium, which indeed they did in 1815, there was no obvious invasion route. And as it happened, Napoleon crossed the border at Charleroi and came up that way. And Wellington famously said that he'd been humbugged because he was expecting Napoleon to come by way of Hull or Mons. So a significant chunk of southern Belgium with its Roman roads was mapped by the sappers in 1814, 1815. And not until the evening of the 15th of June, did Wellington know that Napoleon had come by way of Charleroi. Wellington still had forces out expecting a French advance on Hull or Mons. So I hope that answers the question. Okay. But Wellington, as I said, the year before in 1814, such was his eye for ground, he'd already identified the ridge of Mont Saint-Jean as a place to stop an advance by the French up the main road to Brussels. And that indeed is where Wellington fought and, with the help of the Prussians, defeated Napoleon.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Nick, I'm just curious. Do you have any other in the Bodleian's collection? Do you have any other interesting maps like that? Any other false maps which which appear as detailed as something in the Oxford one that.
Yes, we're bound to have. The Oxford one is just such an obvious one for us to focus on because it's obviously our home city, and certainly people coming along to visit the library are familiar with the city. They're there. They've made the effort to get there. So have a vague idea as to what the city looks like. But yeah, there are numerous examples, all sorts of weird and wonderful things. I'm just thinking of one example of a map which doesn't necessarily, well, does deceive in a way, is the the Gold Coast survey at an inch to a mile, I think, or 1 to 62,500, which for 5 editions has a series of contour lines which take the form of an elephant's body. And it was never updated. It's obviously the surveyors were a bit bored and decided to stick an elephant on the map in the form of contour lines, which is just a bizarre thing to do, but it happens, and it's not necessarily an aim. Is it trying to deceive? It's not as serious, I don't suppose, as the example that John showed from North Africa, and I'm showing from the Civil War. But yeah, there are lots of things where places aren't quite where you expect them to be. So yeah, it does happen.
It must be. With such large collections, you say there must be some curious things. It's but the fact that yes, Oxford is the one. Oxford as the whole, as you said, as the city of the Bodleians in. It's probably the most logical one that comes to mind for a lot of people, and it's it'll be it's genuinely quite interesting. It is genuinely interesting to see it, and it's always again interesting bits of history there. And
can I make the general point? It's an obvious point, but it's worth saying that a deception only works if the person being deceived doesn't know any better. So in 1815, Napoleon was using high quality maps that had been produced by the Austrians 30 years earlier. So, for instance, they didn't have coal mines on them, which had developed in Belgium in the intervening period. And in North Africa, the German map makers, surveyors, and geologists just had no good maps of Egypt. And time again, they used captured maps. So they laid themselves open to deception. And I suspect that the parliamentarians had no better maps of Oxford, and therefore they were leaving themselves open to deception.
Interesting thoughts there, and it's good. Yeah, it's generally an interesting thought about how these deceptive maps for, particularly when people are unaware of the area. That's a key feature there. So, just jumping into a few more bits here in the chat. It's Nick. I often wonder how many place names in England have links to the Civil War, i.e., Oliver's Battery or Battery Hill, which.
That's highly likely, isn't it? There's the great sort of red herring in Oxford to the north of the city where there's a South Parade and a North Parade, but North Parade is south. It's south of South Parade, bizarrely, and the urban myth is that that's the furthest north that the royalists got and the furthest south the parliamentarians got. But I think that's something of a red herring. But I think Jim's right in his question that there are going to be lots of names have resulted from activity in the Civil War. So Oliver's Battery sounds like a perfectly good example. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I know, and another bit in the chat. Similar. This is similar but different. Were bogus maps that were real, but with the fake grid and text to hide where the Normandy landings would take place. This would still allow realistic planning and rehearsal.
Yes.
So yes, another.
Yeah, they're in the National Archives. Yes, the bogus maps were produced for the D-Day landings, and all the names were false. Yeah, and that was to keep the secret of the location of the landings. And so there is a map of Pegasus Bridge and the Orme Canal and etc., which is correct, but all the names have been changed. So unless you knew that part of the world in your briefing before the invasion, you wouldn't know precisely where the landing was going to take place. That was a closely guarded secret, and the bigot was the code name for those that knew the inner secret of D-Day.
Okay. So I have to say thank you, John and Nick. Thank you for the very interesting and surprisingly coordinated talk, which
completely unrehearsed.
So it's I have to say thank you again for speaking today. It's been it's been a pleasure having you speaking, and and I'm glad to have had a turnout, even though it's coming up to Christmas. So it's been a I have to thank everyone who's joined us today, to watch and listen as well. So I would like to also say thanks again to our speakers, and thanks again to our audience. And we'll have our next talk will be taking place in the new year, and that will be from Angela Baker from Eurogeographics, and we look forward to seeing you. We look forward to seeing you in the new year. But for now, thank you and goodbye, and Merry Christmas to everyone.